All right, so I think I'm going to just start talking about the nervine category of herbs. And we're going to, yesterday, and David finished up today, carminatives. And now we're going to do some nervines, and then probably some immune stimulants and adaptogens. And these, you understand that these are the classic categories utilized. All the medical systems will categorize herbs according to whatever, their particular functional grouping is. So in Chinese medicine, we have blood vitalizing herbs that vitalize circulation. We have regulate the qi herbs to move stagnant qi, like he was talking about. We have aromatic herbs to transform dampness. We have herbs to calm the shen, so on and so forth, to expel pathogenic influences. Now that's traditional Chinese way of saying something, and those categories and descriptive terms reflect back a therapeutic principle that's in the medicine. Does that make sense? So qi gets stagnant, so we need to regulate stagnant qi. And there's certain symptomatology that goes along with stagnant qi. Then in Ayurveda, we would say a whole different thing. So this herb, pacifies apanavata, or regulates, pacifies, they say pacifies apanavata, right? Or cools some aspect of pitta, or whatever it might be, and that aspect that's out of whack has a whole set of symptomatology and associated dysfunction that is the treatment principle that we just talked about sort of has implications for the malfunctioning aspect of physiology. So it's actually like pretty linear in that sense. If qi is stagnant, the therapeutic principle is to regulate the qi, and these herbs regulate qi, and they go into a category called regulate qi herbs. Does that make sense? So bupleurum in Chinese medicine dredges the liver qi, regulates the liver qi, and if you just kind of go down that linear fashion, that's kind of how a lot of these systems work. Now, there's a lot more complexity to it than that. And all the herbs have multiple functions, and so there's a lot of different ways to group this stuff. But in Western herbal medicine, we've got nervines, adaptogens, diaphoretics, anti-inflammatories, and it's just the same idea, though. A nervine is an herb that will act upon the nervous system, essentially. And you can break that category down into further. You have nervine herbs that are considered restorative or tonic, so nervine tonics or nervine restoratives, which, as the name implies, have restorative effects upon the nervous system. Then you have nervine, what might be called calmatives or relaxants, which have just that. They calm and they relax the nervous system. In a sense, they're relaxing the nerve current in the nervous system, basically. Which has downwind effects. For example, like we were talking about with the antispasmodics, well, spasming and tension in Chinese medicine would be called wind. It has all the qualities of wind, it has all the qualities of the vata. It's erratic, it's rough, it's tight, it comes when there's dryness in the tissues. And essentially, an antispasmodic would relax that. And that would also be in the category of nervines. So a lot of these things cross over. So you could have a pure category of Western herbal medicine called antispasmodics, but in reality, a lot of the nervine calmatives, the nervine relaxants, have antispasmodic principles. So there's a lot of crossover. It's more like a web when you finally get right down to it than just some linear grouping. But antispasmodic, nervine relaxants, the nerves are intertwined with the muscles like spaghetti, cell by cell. There's no muscle fiber that doesn't have an associated nerve fiber. That's how tightly woven it all is. So anything that acts on the nervous system to relax, it's going to relax muscular tension as well. So whether it's in the digestive system or the neck and shoulders or tension headaches, you know what I mean? So what's it really acting on? The qi, the nervous system, the nerve current, and then that is what actually controls the musculature. Does that make sense? Because the musculature, I mean, in Chinese medicine we say qi is the master of blood, and blood is the mother of qi, or qi, blood follows qi, and actually then qi follows shen. And what essentially that means in this case, though, is that, so I go like this with my hand, and I can move it just by thinking about it, right? Well, at the level of Chinese medicine, the level of consciousness, this is, I'm deciding at some level to move my hand, right? Well, that's very subtle, isn't it? We can't see that happening. That's very subtle influence. All we can see is the hand moving. Well, basically, it takes nerve current and nerve energy, or qi or prana, to send signals through the central nervous system and the spine and the brain to make muscular action happen. But in order for a muscle to do anything, it needs nutrition, and that's the blood. So to do this is taking nutrition. That's why if you work out all day or farm all day, you need a lot of nutrition. But that in Chinese medicine is the structure, it's the nutritive, dense embodiment of ourself, the flesh, the blood. Blood is a big concept, but essentially that's what it is. So in a sense, the Shen is saying, I'm deciding to do this at the level of consciousness, and then the Qi, the nerve current, is moving, and then the blood is what's feeding that ability to do that. So they're all intertwined. So that's kind of interesting. But then, I forgot exactly why I was saying that, though. But the idea, it's really the idea of these nervine relaxants, right? You'll find that I do that a lot. Just take you along on a little journey. Maybe we'll find each other again. But no, I usually get back. I've got enough pitta to be focused. But, you know, when you're talking all day, it's kind of like, it's nice to just like stream things through too. So, nervine calmatives, nervine relaxants, and then we've got an even heavier category. You could say nervine sedatives, like that are actually sedating, right? That are actually heavier than the calmative. So a calmative could be, I'll talk about these and we're going to taste them, but a calmative could be like lemon balm or chamomile. You know, it just adds a calming effect to the body and the mind and the nervous system. But then if you take something like Jamaican dogwood or heavy doses of hops or something, you can get, you know, quite sedated. So it's actually like it's going to much stronger. It's all just a continuum of the same thing, really. I mean, it's all just on a spectrum, so a relaxant can turn into a sedative if you have a big enough dose. But it's nice to group them according to their relative strength, because you want to know what you're doing if you're going to take something that, for insomnia, for example. You wouldn't want something very mild if you really want to knock yourself out. But that's a whole different ballgame anyway. Then there's just, you could say analgesics could fall into the nervine category. Because a lot of pain relief in herbal medicine comes with associated tranquility or relaxation. That's kind of like what you have to sacrifice in many cases with real strong need for pain relief, is you're going to have to also accept that there's probably going to be some sedation involved, very commonly. So it's different than if you're going to, you know, you've got major shoulder pain or whatever, and you take a whole bunch of Advil and you go to work, right? That's the Western idea, like just push through, block the pain, and do the things anyway. Well, the herbal approach is the pain's there. It's telling you something. It would be nice to make you more comfortable, relax the associated tension, get proper blood flow to the area. But at the same time, you have to take care of yourself, which means maybe you need to rest, you know, and rejuvenate. And so a lot of the nervine sort of analgesic sedatives kind of go together. And actually, one of the sort of criticisms of herbal medicine when it comes to pain relief, and one of the reasons actually, in fact, I think the strongest sort of wand that like Western medicine can wave is the fact that they've taken opium from poppies and morphed it into many different things. And that is the strongest painkiller still that they have. And it's a good thing to have it. It's not a negative, it's not a criticism, but the thing of it is it ultimately derives from an herb. And the idea just being that, like, certainly not too many things in the Western, I mean the herbal materia medica can compare with opiates in terms of pain cessation in a rapid way. And a lot of the synthesizing in the chemistry is really just to make it more rapid and to take away some of the associated effects that would go with sort of, taking it in a pure form. But opiates are going to, obviously outcompete, hops, passion flower and skullcap anyway. So it's just interesting. But if you know what you're doing with the pain relief and you're doing it in a holistic fashion, you're going to get good results nonetheless. And you're also going to actually facilitate healing as opposed to just masking. Because you see in the clinic all the time, people coming in, and I'm sure you guys have done it. We've all done it, and you see it all the time. Just people masking pain and then it worse because they're not getting the roots of the problem. So that's the main categories. You also have you could say nervous stimulants are actually in the nervine category. So these are the caffeine-containing plants: mate, cola nut, coca leaf. These don't all have caffeine, but they're stimulants, basically. They stimulate nervous function. So a milder one might be damiana, for example, from Mexico. You could certainly say coffee might even be a nervine stimulant because it's acting on the nervous system. And so it's interesting because, again, clinically speaking, most people you see in the clinic could wake up in the morning and have a pot of very strong chamomile tea and just sip on it all day long and maybe eventually come close to a baseline of normal nervous system functioning. And what the culture does in general is gets immediately revved up with, what I'm calling nervine stimulants, caffeine-based stimulants, and drink those all day long, which makes most people that you see crazy, eventually, at least tired. But they have their place, but again, the nervine stimulants were commonly prescribed by, say, like the physiomedicalists and the people in the early 20th century, because you can imagine if you're primarily an agrarian culture and you're living in places without heat for the most part, except for what you cut and make happen, and you're living in places where you're a little more exposed to the influences of weather and so forth, that getting up in the morning and having a strong dose of some kind of caffeinated beverage would seem like a real panacea, and maybe even help to sort of balance out some of the heavier Kafic exhaustive tendencies that culture might be sort of subject to. Whereas our culture, with hyperstimulation at every turn, not here on the farm necessarily, but like in most major cities, everyone's completely hyperstimulated. And even you don't have to be in a city. I mean, TV, like cell phones, all that stuff, just hyperstimulation at the level of the nervous system. So nervous stimulants, although enjoyable and have their place, are overused, of course. But again, it's part of the nervine category of herbs to know about. Who would benefit most, though, from what constitutional type, right? Right. And who shouldn't have any? Well, kind of could make a case for either one. Coffee, as delicious and wonderful and otherworldly, blissful as it is, the oils in it can really heat people up. If so, pitta can have a problem with that over time, especially in the stomach. So those are the major categories. Now, I want to pass around a couple of nervous system calmatives and do what we did yesterday. But one of the first things to do is when you take it, notice again, we're looking for a qualitative, energetic effect here. Now, the physiomedicalists and the eclectics, and I've studied a good amount of their work, they have a lot of great old texts that they left behind, and these guys were sort of, these guys were kind of the people that preserved the Western herbal energetic tradition, especially the physiomedicalists. If you read the physiomedicalist literature like like Cook, for example, a physiomedical dispensary. There's some real gems in that book where it could have come right out of a Chinese medical or an Ayurvedic medical text, because what they're interested in is the vital force. And they use this term liberally in their writing. And the vital force is the self-organizing principle within us that could be likened absolutely to chi, to prana. Basically, these guys were vitalists. They were energetic docs, every bit as deep as the Chinese and Ayurvedic physicians, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to herbal medicine. Not all of them, but some of them. Some of them were real seers, And so when you take this stuff that I'm going to pass around, some of these tinctures, notice what first hits you. And one of the things that they would do is classify herbal medicine in certain very simple ways. So we talk about, like we've been talking about here, like, apana and samana and, regulate chi and release exterior. Well, they often, one of the first categorizations they would talk about when they would talk about an energetic effect of herbs is it stimulating, bless you, or relaxing? So the very first thing they wanted to know, is it stimulating to the vital force or is it relaxing to the vital force? That's it. Very simple. So when you take these, notice right off the bat, if you can get a hit with just a few drops, is your vital force more stimulated or is your vital force more relaxed? Okay? That's the first thing to just sort of notice. And so I'm going to start off with, let's start off with passion flower, which we'll talk about this afternoon more. So just take a couple of drops. And remember, if you're going to be an herbalist, you have to get used to the fact that the doc always takes the medicine first. Now, that wouldn't work in Western pharmaceutical medicine because, you can't just be popping beta blockers and Adderall.
Opiates. They should be.
Opiates, steroids, 1 second, Mrs. Jones. Take a little Adderall. But the point of it is, and this has to be done contemplatively, but again, if I stop talking, I'll stop talking for a minute if you want. Just do this for a sec. It's like an information delivery mechanism that's hard to turn off once it gets going. So just take a few drops and just notice what happens to you. You can give Ginger a couple drops too if you want.
What about Ginger?
Now, notice what I asked also. See if you can get some aspect of what it tastes like. If you can pick up a few tastes. Now, when you're working with a tincture, you have to sort of screen out the fact that it's in organic grape alcohol, micro-distilled, but it's fiery. So you have to screen out that, and you can still get a sense of the taste, because one of the things about the fire element is it moves very quickly. So what happens is it is gone first, and what's left are the more earth tones, the deeper notes of that tincture. And understand that these tinctures are fresh from the farm. I'd say they're magnificent.
I'll co-sign.
Okay, so. And if you didn't get the full effect, pass it around again. Because, again, this is hard to do when we're engaged at the cerebral level. But can anyone sense relaxation versus stimulation?
Don't say anything till we feel it. Sorry. I want to get the experience before people put ideas in there.
Oh, I thought everyone had it. But also, I've already given you so many hints.
You're not going to be too becalmed, are you?
No.
So going out for all this lovely conversation.
Me be calmed?
Yeah.
No, it'll take more than that.
Oh, that's good.
All right, so. Anybody? Yeah. It brings you down just a little bit, right? Now, here's the thing I want to get across. There's always going to be some people that differ. And I'll say this, there's a couple things. The exceptions do not prove the rule, for one. And for two, this is a practice, and it takes practice. To sense physiology in relation to plant medicine takes practice. That's why I said everyone has to take the medicine to become a good herbalist. It's not theoretical. It's very much occurring. And it doesn't take much of a dose because it's an energetic effect. It's very quick that the vital force, in response to the vital force in that plant, they basically, what I like to call, resonate. It creates a resonance. Because I've noticed this over the years, clinically actually, that what you're trying to do is basically the same thing as when you put a pebble in a pond and it ripples. And you get the ripples kind of going, right? Well, if you just put one pebble in a pond, it's just going to go like this. And eventually, it's going to smooth out and you won't be able to detect the ripples on the shoreline because it's not a big enough pebble and it hasn't been done enough, right? But if you put in a pebble and then another one and then another one and you keep doing it, you're going to eventually create ripples, which I like to call a resonance. And that resonance is what we're looking for here. And that's why we don't take a nervous relaxant just one time and expect much to happen. Because we took a few drops, and those few drops have an effect. And the more you practice mindfully with this, the more you'll feel those effects more powerfully, especially if you have certain constitutions, but anyone can do it. And then, if you take it, I mean, we just took a few drops, but the general tone of your nervous system is going to reassert itself relatively soon, because that's where you were already at. But then if you took it again 10 minutes later, and then you took it again 10 minutes later, eventually your nervous system is going to start to get the message that this is where it could be in that case, and it won't necessarily go back up here, but maybe you don't take it for 3 or 4 more days, and maybe it does go back up here. It all depends on what you do otherwise besides herbal medicine. So you might find that you go out and you're a New York stockbroker. Well, forget it. If you're just going to take passion flower a couple of times and expect something to happen, because when you get back out there, the chemistry that's produced by that onslaught of stimulation is far more powerful than the chemistry that's being produced by the relationship that you just had with that herb in that 1 or 2 doses. So one of the things that you find challenging clinically is that we're very gross in a lot of ways. We're very dense, you know what I mean? The things that we can actually do, most Americans say, right? And even to be humble about it, all of us, actually. So we can't say most Americans and not look at ourselves, because it's always better to look at ourselves primarily. But in general, if we're going to make a comparative analysis, the fact that people can put sloppy joes and coffees and all this stuff in their body in excess, and artificial ingredients and all this stuff, and not necessarily sense what's occurring, is an aspect of grossness. And that's challenging in the clinic. It's also challenging when it comes to the reestablishment of herbal medicine as a primary form of healthcare until now. Because we've gone through a pretty gross phase, in the 1950s, right? What was it like, better living through chemistry and Fruit Loops and Ajax and whatever, all that stuff. I mean, it was all just, how can we take fossil fuels, turn them into chemistry, and make them into everything, and that's going to and then ingest it all, and then surround ourselves with it. And that experiment is an utter failure in many ways. Not every way. I mean, I like my iPhone. I mean, you couldn't possibly pry it out of my dead cold hands. But the thing is, we don't need to give up. It's not like we have to go back and live in teepees. It means we have to I'm convinced there's no going back. It's all about forward momentum. The universe is a novelty-generating machine. It's always going to create new. And if you gave, Lao Tzu a choice between his abacus and an iPhone, I don't think he would choose the abacus. Right? Well, I don't know where this is. I don't know what he might be. So there's no need for that, is my point. We just need to reestablish what it means to be a basic functional. Like I've said this story before. I mean, I've been able to travel around and good fortune. My brother has an indigenous rights organization called Land is Life, and I've been able to travel around in many places in the world and work with indigenous people directly in places where they're still really indigenous, not marginalized, but like really just living the way that they've lived literally for thousands and thousands of years. And you constantly are running into children who know far more, of course, because this is where they live, about every kind of plant, every kind of animal, every kind of everything, than a PhD ethnobotanist in this culture, right? Who spends their whole life studying it in higher education. And it's remarkable to hang out with these people and realize, okay, so they have something that we don't have, and we have something that they don't have, you know? Because I can look at my iPhone and I have the sum total in my hand of all of the world's knowledge beamed to me through space in a millisecond. And I have that wide of a perspective just because of the virtue of the fact that we are Americans. And they don't have that. But the thing is, we need what they have more than they need what we have at this point. Because we're in the control position. We're the power position right now. We're the ones who are making the decisions. The world isn't going to be saved. I mean, I'm being, the camera, I'm being like, sort of like grandiose about it. But what I mean is the Kalahari Bushmen are not going to save the planet because they're not destroying the planet, and it's not necessarily their responsibility. They might, the wisdom they have might actually be, absolutely integral to saving the planet. But the thing of it is, we have access to all the technology. We have access to all the things that are like extracting things. We understand how the economic systems work. We're controlling the economic systems. So the point is, it's up to us to get what they have. That's my point. I'm going way the hell off the subject. And I'm going to come back now. This is my primary function, is just to rant. All right.
A few more drops.
5 minutes? I haven't even started. All right. Oh my God. I was thinking maybe we can just let me do the tincture in the afternoon, because then we can not have to do all the choreography before lunch, and I'm on a roll, and we'll do it. I'll skip my other one because I haven't even started. I've just been talking about. Can you guys handle? Can you handle a little bit more like this? And then I'll promise we'll make the tincture in the afternoon, and I'll go myself. And okay. So let's talk about a few herbs here. Okay.
What about the new iPhone?
You should watch that on tape. I laid out the strategy for saving the world, I think. All right.
You too.
Let's talk about the actually we started off doing it right anyway, because I talked about the nervine relaxants and I talked about the resonance, and these are important concepts. So clinically, things like passion flower is a wonderful nervine relaxant. And the reason why it seems sometimes in the herbal traditions to have like a wimpy reputation potentially, and not really, but the point is, again, it's when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about clinically, because most people don't necessarily understand dosage, preparation, constitution, and frequency of dosage, right? And this resonance idea is important because passion flower, you just took a few drops, but no one's feeling overly sedated. And if you were feeling anxious, it's not like it's just gone, right? But the thing of it is, if you dose it appropriately throughout the day, these nervine relaxants over time will reduce nervous tone sufficiently to ultimately create a feedback loop where if someone feels relaxed, then they don't generate as much tension in response to whatever they're responding to. So if you take passion flower throughout the day, 3, 4 times, 5 times, even small dosages, maybe a dropper full in a little water, sip it down, 3, 4, 5 times a day. That's not a very big dose, but what it's going to do is every time you take it, your system gets a little bit of a dose of like down regulation. And then when your boss comes in and he's screaming at you to get this done and get that done in your cubicle or whatever, instead of reacting because you already had high sympathetic nervous tone, now you're going to react in a slightly lower place, and you might not actually be quite as reactive. Because one aspect of the pranavata is that as it's taking in all these sensory impressions and sort of organizing them so the other vatas can take them and do what they're going to do with them. So Vyana is going to take some of that information and do something with it. Udana is going to take some of that information. Apana and Samana, they're all going to take that prana coming in through the five senses and start doing things with it. Once the gateway, pranavata, has sort of brought it in and sort of ascertained what it's all about, and then sends it on its way, and they all kind of get involved. And these are all just like breakdowns of something that's actually a continuous thing anyway. But the idea is some of these things reduce the static electricity, the chaos, the overwhelm that's happening at the level of pranavata, so sensory impressions can be organized in a way that's proper. And what I mean by that is, most people you meet, including myself often, or at least not relative to like a lot of the people I meet, but definitely enough to recognize, are in sympathetic nervous system more than they should be. And in response to things that are concoctions of their own mind states and things that are not threatening. But at the animal level, we get all jacked up and we're kind of stressed out. We generate a lot of attention. We consume a lot of resources. And we're all just thinking about like our visa bill or something. There's no threat there. It's not like a saber-toothed tiger. It's just like a figment of our imagination. And the thing about that is, so what ends up happening when that occurs is the pranavata is basically being, well, what's happening essentially is, like I said, there's a chaotic interpretation of reality. And then everything you do, everything you interpret in that state might seem like a threat, might seem like more of the same, right? It's sort of like there's no malleability built into the system. There's no sort of give at that point. It's all just bzz, bzz, bzz. It's just like that cartoon Fritz the Cat, right? He's like one eye's big here, or like a Hunter Thompson. One eye's big and like, you know, it's like all demented looking. That's your pranavata. At a certain stage, you're just all like zzz, zzz, static electricity, pinball machines on tilt. Well, these nervous relaxants, these calmatives, sort of smooth out the flow. One of the things that's interesting about it, particularly when they're combined with what in Chinese medicine would be called liver-regulating herbs, is that there's a syndrome called liver qi stagnation, sympathetic hyperdrive tension. And what happens a lot of times, your hands and your feet get cold in that state, right? And your muscles get tense, your neck and shoulder gets tense, your midriff, your hypochondriac region, they call it, gets tense, you can't breathe as well. Well, when you take some of these nervine relaxants and some of these liver-regulating herbs at the same time, lo and behold, circulation starts to happen again. You get warm, you relax. It's the same what happens when you're in a meditative state. Everything warms up, right? You start to feel the heat. Well, that's Vyana. That's the outward moving wind. And actually, metaphorically, in a sense, what I like to think of that as is flow. I mean, that's surrender, essentially. Because when you're meeting life like this, you're hitting your head against the wall, you know? You're meeting friction with friction. That creates contraction. That creates all the qualities we've been talking about. And when that means Vyana is not able to flow, the life force is actually being constricted to conform to some aspect of what you think should be happening, as opposed to what is happening, right? Or what you don't even know are open to the possibility of what could happen. Well, when Vyana is flowing, that's all about surrender. And that's all about also nervous system tension. Does that make sense? So anyway, I like passion flower in particular, though, for like the wired. You know, all right, what flavors did you taste in there? You got some sweet. That's good. Sweet, anything else? I'm going to pass a little bitter. I said we'll slow down and do this more deliberately now. Sweet and bitter, definitely. So generally speaking, the nervous restoratives, both in Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, and Western herbal medicine, are going to have some aspect of the sweet taste. Now that's obvious, right? Because sweet is going to pacify which dosha? Right. Vata and Pitta, but certainly it's going to pacify Vata, and there's definitely an aspect of tension and nervous system tension and stress that is Pitta related. And David's going to talk about that this afternoon. I mean, what happens when you're thinking too much? Besides the mobile quality that's there, the constant motion of Vata, what else is happening? Well, what's happening on a level of energetic? You're generating what? Heat. Thoughts have friction associated with them. Every time you have a thought, just imagine, it's just like the cartoons when they have a thought and it's like a little bubble. And there's a thought, like Charlie Brown's thinking, I love Lucy. She's a babe, right? Well, that's a combustion. Just think of a thought as a little puff of smoke. It takes blood sugar in the brain to produce a thought. To produce thought energy. So, while we're embodied at least. And so, there's a little combustion. So if you're thinking, so the Vata is pushing the Pitta. Mobile quality, too many thoughts, anxiety, leading to heat. Well, in Chinese medicine, that's often, essentially, that's heat that's generated in the heart. And in the heart area is considered the Shen, the seat of consciousness. Actually, Pranavata, I've read, in certain places, they located it in the chest, as well as the head, or the brain, because it's the seat of consciousness. And so, if there's too much thought energy due to this Vata pushing anxious thoughts, you're going to generate heat, and that heat's going to sometimes get stuck in the heart area. And you see that as a red tip on people's tongue, and the points on their back, bladder 15, are tight, and there's nodules on them, and you put needles, and big red splotches come off those needles, and then they relax, and those efferent nerves that feeding into that mechanism off the spine just relax, and that releases the heat. Literally, that's been generated, so there's where the Pitta comes in. Well, I think passion flower does both of those things. The sweetness pacifies Vata, and the bitterness cools Pitta. And the sweetness and the bitterness combination has a nourishing and restorative property, as well as a property to, like I said, to cool that heat constraint syndrome. Does that make sense? So that happens commonly in the wired and tired phase of nervous exhaustion, which is actually what's happening to me the other night, and I drank the passion flower and I slept like a baby. Wired, basically been thinking, working for a long time in a row, and not necessarily like emptying out, because actually emptying out is the most important remedy of all for all of these things, is space. Then comes the garden, because working with the nervine herbs with a little weeding tool in your hand is probably going to be much more therapeutically active than working with it in a little bottle in your cubicle, right? That's profound right there, actually. That sums it all up. We could end this whole conference at this point. Because that's actually true. Our society needs that more than it needs a commodity. But we need both. So anyway, what was I talking about? Just joking. So I was wired. I was too wired to fall asleep. I was too wired to rest. And when I would sleep, it would be like surface level. And there'd be vivid dreams. Not horribly so. I don't usually get the red tip hardcore. But there'd be like enough nervous system activity that in the sleep phase, I was still active. I was still like awake and alive when I should not have been, right? I should have been deep. Well, passion flower is perfect in that instance because it cleared out the heat in the heart. It slowed down the mobility of the mind, and I went really deep. Just think of it like that. Wired, tired, okay? It's classically given a lot of times for people in this heart heat syndrome. People get heart constraint, and that disorders which aspect of Vata? Where's Hillary? She left. Well, to be honest, yeah. Heartbeat, respiration. Dhyana? Yep. Dhyana, Udana, Prana. All of them, really. All those three. But those three, anyway. So anyway, what happens is people get palpitations a lot of times. Their heart starts to like flutter, starts to beat rapidly, tachycardia. Passion flower can normalize all kinds of nervous cardiac issues. Even ones that are, you can feel this herb is exceedingly safe. So you can feel very confident giving it to people who have nervous tachycardia or who lay down and get palpitations, or when they're anxious they start to just feel like an undue sense of their heart beating in their chest. All of these disorders of vata, fantastic. Works really well. You don't have to even get, it's not necessarily going to treat the root cause totally, because a lot of times in that case the root cause is you need to chill out and learn how to regulate your nervous system in general. But it can be tremendous for symptomatic relief and go a significant way towards the cure. But Dr. Ladd used to say herbs are, I'm forgetting the actual number, and I've heard it a million times. He actually was an understatement on purpose, but 5% of the cure, right? 5% of the cure compared to like lifestyle, body work, nutrition, all this kind of stuff. So don't ever think that that's not necessarily he didn't mean it as a blanket statement, because sometimes they're like 80% of the cure in certain cases. But the point he was saying is that don't expect, if you're like lifestyle and you hate your job and you're, hate your relationships and whatever, all the things that are wrong and you never exercise it, like an herb's going to do anything.